Good afternoon, everyone. Friends, China has been the largest export economy in the world since 2009. From our smartphones to our clothing, there are few, if any, aspects of our lives left untouched by China's supply chain. These parts, however, may have been made by a member of a Chinese religious minority forced to work in a prison factory. Since 2017, Chinese communist regime have been found committed crimes against humanity and genocide against the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in the northeast East Turkestan region, Tibet, and detaining as many as 1 million people and subjecting detainees and others to forced labor inside and outside the East Turkestan region. Imprisoned Christians are forced to work in labor camps in the name of re-education. Practitioners of Falun Gong and other people of faith have also been targeted for forced labor and even torture. Western companies are knowingly continuing to profit from the exploitation of these groups. The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, UFLPA, which went into effect last summer, is likely the broadest import legislation in modern U.S. history targeting forced labor. According to a news report, that around $1.3 billion worth of goods have been seized as a result of the UFLPA in its first year of action so far. The majority were solar panels with cotton, tomatoes, and other imports included as well. Today, the distinguished speakers in this panel will address ways to expand upon and improve collective actions in confronting corporations across industries to fully remove themselves from the Chinese regime's tainted supply chain. I want to invite our distinguished panelists to join the stage before giving their remarks. Ambassador Kelly Curry, who is already been renowned for addressing this issue. She's the former U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issue at the UN Commission on the Status of Women and Social and Economic Council. And Ms. Shiming Lei, she's an activist and wife of Chinese prisoner of conscience, Mr. Chong Yuan. And finally, Zhu'er Ilham. She is working at the Coalition to End Uyghur Forced Labor. And we have all women star lineup today. And let's welcome our panelists to come over. So each one of you will have up to 7 minutes to make opening remarks, and hopefully you can have some time for Q&A. Ambassador Kerry, please.
Thank you. Is it on? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob Fu, for that wonderful, kind introduction and for laying the table for the discussion today. I know that my fellow panelists are going to talk about various aspects of how, as consumers and as actors in the marketplace and people of faith, we can help to ensure that we are not supporting the repression of other people of faith and other human beings, in fact, in China, and by supporting the Chinese party state and its ability to use Western capital and Western investor dollars, as well as our consumer spending, to support its repression. I'm going to talk very specifically about one aspect of this, which is how the Chinese Communist Party leverages capital markets, especially the United States capital markets. By capital markets, I mean Wall Street, and for many of us in this room, that means our retirement savings, our 401ks, our IRAs, and anything else that we invest in the stock market. The Chinese Communist Party is able to benefit from our free and open markets by getting Chinese companies listed on U.S. stock exchanges. There are more than 200 Chinese companies that are currently listed on U.S. stock exchanges right now that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ and are able to access our broad and deep capital markets, which are the most liquid and largest in the world. Now, what this means is that they're able to get capital relatively cheaply. And it means that U.S. investors technically can buy pieces of these companies. But the problem is, well, there are several problems. First of all, these companies are not private companies in the sense that GE or Apple or the other companies that you're buying in the stock market are private companies. The Chinese Communist Party owns what's called golden shares in each one of these companies. And any important company operating in China today, the party state owns they may own a small piece, share-wise number, the number may be small, but they're called golden shares because they allow the party to control the company. And I want to say that again. They may own 1%. These golden shares may be 1% of the equity stake in these companies, but because they are these golden shares, they allow the Chinese Communist Party to ultimately control what happens to that company. The other thing that the Chinese Communist Party does is it restricts these companies from sharing their audit reports and their financial reports with our stock regulators. Every other company that is listed on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or any of our exchanges has to provide certain reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Chinese companies do not. The U.S. passed a law several years ago called the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act that was supposed to remedy this problem. But unfortunately, the agency of the U.S. government that's responsible for that, administering that law, has cut a deal, another bad deal with the Chinese Communist Party that allows these companies to once again circumvent our laws, our securities law that every other company has to abide by. And by just giving them some things in Hong Kong and not giving them full access. So we don't really know what's really going on inside these companies. And that gets to the third problem, which is that most of them are set up through what's called a variable interest entity. And I'm throwing a lot of financial terms at you, but the whole point of this is that, you buy a share in a company, you think you have an ownership stock, you don't. You're giving them your money, your hard-earned retirement savings or money for your kids' college fund for something that really is nothing. And they are using it to then build up these companies that unfairly compete against our companies and in some cases are involved in grave violations of human rights, which my colleague Joyer and others will talk about today, because some of these companies that are on our exchanges are on what's called the entity list for commerce. Again, Joyer will talk about this, or other lists that the U.S. government has compiled that says that they've been complicit in gross violations of human rights. They can be blacklisted by the U.S. government from procurement, by the Department of Defense, or put on an entity list as complicit in forced labor of Uyghur people and complicity in the Uyghur genocide, but you can still buy their stocks in the stock market through mutual funds and and by going to your broker and say, I want to buy stock in this company, you can still do that. So there's this very bizarre misalignment in our laws that allows capital markets and these companies to continue to take advantage of our capital markets, even if they are restricted from doing other things with our government. This is even a problem I used to work in the federal government, and my thrift savings plan, which is our 401k, is still invested in some of these companies. This is the U.S. government's 401k, and we still can't get these companies out of our 401ks. So this is something where we've had to, I've gone to my own investment advisor. If you have you need to go to your investment advisor and say, please tell me what my exposure is to Chinese companies. And it's important, and we can talk about specific ones. I can give you more granular detail in the Q&A if that's something you're interested in. But this is one of the biggest sources of wealth that the Chinese Communist Party has, that they take advantage of in our open, free society. And then it also allows them to manipulate these big Wall Street banks and turn them into their allies. So the Chinese Communist Party's biggest allies in the United States are BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity, these big Wall Street companies, because even if they're selling you garbage products, which they know they are, they want to be able to sell over-the-counter equities to Chinese people, 1.4 billion Chinese investors. So they're willing to take a loss and sell Americans a defective product, essentially, in order to be able to access the Chinese market and make it so that they can make what's the word want to use? Suck up to the Chinese Communist Party in order to get market access. So this is a really serious problem that we're just starting to tackle in the human rights space. I'm working with a great coalition of organizations, several of which are represented here today, to try to tackle this. But it's something that as consumers and as investors, we all have a role in tackling. So I'll end there, and maybe Joy or Ted Will.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to meet you here. Today, the topic is a hard topic, but your listening and support makes things different. I'm Shi Minglei, wife of Cheng Yuan. I'm also a Chinese Christian and a business leader. 3 months ago, I went to Home Depot and bought these gloves. And they are Milwaukee tool gloves. Anyone who heard Milwaukee tool? You can raise your hand. Yeah, so it's a famous American brand. If you look at the gloves, they are fluffy, they are durable, they just looks nice. It looks perfect for your housing works, isn't it? Unfortunately, Milwaukee tool gloves approved to be produced in Hunan Zhishan prison by Chinese political prisoners, including my husband. That day, I stood in Home Depot looking at the gloves on the shelf. I had a panic. I heard the voice of my heart broken. My husband, Cheng Yuan, has been detained by the Chinese government for 3.5 years. He is a fruitful Chinese human rights activist. As founder of NGO Changsha Funeng, he advocated for both birth rights, education rights, health rights, and equal job rights for the Chinese disadvantaged people. He was also one of the leading advocates working on ending Chinese government one-child policy. Due to his wonderful work, he was arrested, arbitrarily detained, secretly sentenced, and tortured. His access to legal defense was totally deprived. He was put into incommunicado till last month. Since January 2022, he has been jailed in Hunan Zhishan prison, where he was tortured and became forced labor. He was put into solitary confinement for 3 months, experienced food deprivation, physical and mental abuse. Prisoners released from Hunan Zhishan prison, including Taiwanese Li Mingzhe, testified they were forced to work in the prison-owned workshops. The work condition there is outrageous. Every day, they need work for 3 to 15 hours, only for day rest the whole year. They worked 5 months, but only got paid 100 RMB, which equals to $14. No protective mask, and The hazardous material in the workshop could result to permanent damage to their health. There was a quality control manager based in this prison who worked for Milwaukee Toll, often asked the prison guards, beat prisoners, if there is any quality, process, or lead time delay. Then I experienced a big spirit fight. One voice told me no one cares. Business companies only exist for money. As a business leader myself, I had lots of connections in Amazon, Home Depot, Walmart, and other big Western companies. Stand up and confront these companies are not easy for me. Even I had been advocating for my husband and confronted the Chinese government for a long time. I had panics every day, and it lasted 2 weeks. Another voice told me, no, that's not right. You're a Christian. You should pursue God's justice. That's you should do. And I pray, and then I received one message from God. Just follow me. I will strengthen you, I will protect you, and I will comfort you. Then I started to confront these big companies. I started a petition and have received 1,015 signatures. I wrote letters to Milwaukee Toll CEO, Mr. Steven Richman, Amazon CEO, Jeff Bezos, Andy Jassy, Home Depot CEO, and Walmart CEO, and all their leadership. Till now, Walmart deleted Milwaukee Toll Globe's listings on their website. Because I wrote a letter to him, Mr. Doug McMillan is a Christian, I asked him how you think of God's justice. He didn't answer, he didn't reply, but they deleted. But until today, Milwaukee Toll totally denied, and Home Depot, Amazon, they did take any action. Today, my lawyer sits there. He sent a demand letter to Milwaukee Toll and its mother company, TTI Group. TTI Group is based in Hong Kong, but if you look at their shareholders, they are U.S. investors. And their CEO is also a religious people. So we sent this demand letter to Milwaukee Toll and its mother company, TTI Group. We officially pursue a civil lawsuit in the United States to make these U.S. company accountable. To end the forced labor in China, I need your support, and especially help to stop the big U.S. companies using and profiting from any kind of forced labor, including the Chinese political prisoners and also the Uyghur people. No matter you're a legislator or religious leader, or media reporter, a business leader, or human rights activist, you can help me make a change. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jawhar Ilham. First of all, I would like to thank China Aid and Mr. Bob Fu for organizing this side panel at the International Religious Freedom Summit. Corporate accountability and social responsibility are two primary principles in utilizing ethical supply chains, but are more than often overlooked by the human rights communities and circumvented by a majority of small and large businesses. So as many of you know, the Chinese government's abuses of Uyghur and other Turkic and Muslim peoples have been deemed crimes against humanity by prominent human rights organizations around the world. In my homeland, I am Uyghur, just FYI. In my homeland, the Uyghur region, state-sponsored forced labor is widespread and intersects with other egregious human rights abuses, including mass arbitrary detention, mandatory political indoctrination, culture assimilation, forced family separation, and pervasive surveillance. Several of my family members were arbitrarily detained, including my father, Ilham Tohti, a renowned economist who is now serving a life sentence. In 2019, the Uyghur region was the source of over 20% of the global apparel industry's cotton supply, which is the main component in clothes that we wear on a daily basis. And in 2020, the Uyghur region produced 45% of the solar-grade polysilicon utilized globally in the production of solar corporations run through in the production of solar panels and smartphones and computers and semiconductors. And the supply chains of many leading corporations that run through a region where forced labor is rife and human rights due diligence is virtually impossible there. In these circumstances, comprehensive and robust enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which Mr. Bafu earlier mentioned, is imperative. It has been 7 months since U.S. Customs and Border Protection started implementing the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Since its enforcement, the world has witnessed a relative shift away from the potentially of our imports being tainted by Uyghur forced labor. This supply chain shakeup has resulted in the dropping of Xinjiang cotton gin sales, and a great number of shipments have been detained under the UFLPA. The Worker Rights Consortium that I work for is an independent labor rights monitoring nonprofit organization that was established over 20 years ago. Our mission is to conduct independent fact-finding investigations into working conditions and supply chains in the global apparel industry. Based on our knowledge of the conditions that enable meaningful due diligence, one of the essential aspects is that workers can speak freely. That is why in our engagement on the issue of Uyghur forced labor, it has been very clear that due diligence is not possible in the Uyghur region given the high level of pervasive surveillance and repression. Therefore, a group of civil society groups, investor, religious groups, and labor rights watchdogs, including the WRC and also China Aid, came together and formed the coalition to end Uyghur forced labor. The coalition launched a call to action in July 2020 to ask companies to extricate from the Uyghur region at every level of their supply chains. As part of the coalition, we have engaged with numerous brands and companies and retailers and have seen companies taking important steps towards exiting the Uyghur region, even while some companies have been hesitant to speak publicly about their actions because of fear for losing their stores and partnerships or being retaliated by the Chinese government. Now that fortunately, that the coalition's call to action has essentially been enshrined into U.S. law as part of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, we're calling on companies to apply the UFLPA standard throughout their operations around the world, not just in the U.S., to ensure other markets like the EU, Japan, Australia, Canada to not become a dumping ground for consumer goods made with Uyghur forced labor. So we look forward to strong and rigorous enforcement of the law and to the expansion of the current entity list, which is very important. I like to stress that, that publicly identifies manufacturers known to use forced labor. Strong enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is vital because it decreases the demand for products with content from the Uyghur region made with forced labor. It sends an important message to authorities responsible for state-sponsored forced labor, and it makes clear to companies that they will be held accountable by the law. With a rebuttable presumption, if a company attempts to bring any product into the U.S. border with any amount of content from the Uyghur region, it will be considered as made by Uyghur forced labor unless the company proves otherwise with clear and convincing evidence. So hopefully, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act now means that less of the Uyghur and Turkic population in China is going to be in forced labor conditions. But that will only happen if, in addition to abiding by the UFLPA, importers agree to not use other markets as dumping grounds for forced labor tended goods. In the coming month and years, it will also be essential that other countries put similar laws in place to ban the importation of goods made with forced labor, which will require companies to provide full supply chain transparency and enforce the law on imports at their border. Otherwise, we will see Chinese companies transferring their goods into Malaysia, Bangladesh, or Indonesia, which are the largest garment-producing countries, also the largest garment exporting countries to the world. So we'll see them producing those products and eventually redirect the shipments to the U.S. As a Uyghur, I am impassioned by these crucial steps by the U.S. government towards protecting my community and the Turkic groups who are persecuted in China for their culture differences and religious beliefs and their identity. To finally have impactful legislation against forced labor in the country where I live is heartening, but we cannot stop here. We need every world leader to refuse to allow companies operating within their borders to benefit from Uyghur forced labor. And we need every corporation to wake up to the consequences of these actions and clean up their supply chains. And we need to keep working on this issue together until every innocent Uyghur is free. I hope including my father. Thank you.
Thank you, Jor, and thank you, Minglei and Kelly. We all know, of course, the Communist Party is kind of using the Western technology to be enabled, empowered, and partially really contribute to these atrocities. I remembered just a few months ago when I got a phone call from a group of exiled Chinese Christians in South Korea, and one of the elders' parents were kidnapped. And basically, the Chinese state security said, ask him in South Korea to turn on his WeChat account, activate so that he can be globally positioned for potential kidnapping. And each of the Uyghur, even farmers, right, are asked to receive a government smartphones. Of course, it's installed. And it's not only the surveillance technology, but also really nowadays the U.S. technology such as ECMO, is being exported to China and used for massive organ harvesting. Organ harvesting. Of course, it's being used in all the different ethnicities, and from Xinjiang to Tibet. And so I want to maybe raise this first question to our panelists. What should we, do for better, to these Western technologies on surveillance and others? And the law we had enacted in Congress, and how can it be improved? Obviously, it's not $1.6 billion, right? I asked Walmart executives how long will it take to move the supply chain from China. He said 53 years. And that was a private dinner and with the Walmart executives. So please. Ambassador, maybe you start.
Again, from my perspective, the money that we provide through U.S. capital markets and through other Western capital markets is the lifeblood that sustains the Chinese Communist Party. we have, because our savings and our investment funds go to fuel their economic growth and allow them to expand and expand into overseas markets and build factories and advance research and development, let alone steal U.S. technology, which they do quite frequently. And this is how they're able to grow these companies, because they don't have the same access to capital in China that they do to make them global brands. They really need U.S. capital. And so it's up to us as investors to make sure that we are not providing that, and that we are not providing them the fuel. The other thing that our capital markets have done is bail them out from the consequences of their bad governance and their mistakes. No other communist party has been able to be as successful as the Chinese Communist Party, because they have not had access to Western investment the way that the Chinese Communist Party has. We didn't invest in the former Soviet Union and provide them with trillions of dollars in capital to help them develop their industry. We've done that in China. We have created this environment that has allowed them to develop these companies and grow these businesses that are then not only destroying our industrial base, creating unlevel playing field for global trade, but also perpetrating these mass human rights violations. And so it's not only economically disadvantaging the United States and other countries, including developing countries that can't compete with this model of development, but it also it's a moral stain on all of us that we are providing the funding and the fuel for what they're doing. And we as investors have the power to go to our investment managers and our pension fund managers and say, stop, just stop. We do not want to invest our money in these genocidal businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any thoughts? Yeah.
There are several points I'd like to address. So first, hello, can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Close.
There are a few points I'd like to address. First, I'd like to say that oftentimes people mix the concept of operating in China equals bad. So I like to address that. Oftentimes, as a labor rights organization, we do not encourage companies to exit a country or a region completely. And it is our first time that we encourage a law to ban production of an entire region and of like all goods. And it is our first time basically saying that, well, there's no other way. You will have to exit for a company to actually ensure they are they are operating in an ethical way. Their only way to make sure of that is by exiting the Uyghur region completely. But that's not oftentimes the case. So I like to just reiterate that. So when you see labor rights mistreatments and mispractices, we do not automatically encourage people to leave, because that's bad for the workers. But in the Uyghur region's case, because even when companies stay, when factories remained, Uyghur workers, Uyghur prisoners or camp detainees who are forced to work in factories, no matter how companies think they are protecting the human rights of those so-called workers, it is not really helping, because the beneficiaries is the Chinese government. And therefore, the only way for companies to know, so whenever companies say, we're doing everything we can to do our due diligence and we're doing everything we can, that's not the point, and it is not going to help. The only way for them to know that they are doing the right thing is by leaving. And unfortunately, oftentimes we don't want that to happen. We don't want to leave workers to be jobless. But when we're talking about Uyghur people, they're the ones who had perfect jobs before that. They chose in their own wheel. They could be medical doctors or soccer players or teachers, but they're forced to get trainings for threading or working on mills, and then to make different kinds of garment pieces, or like Ms. Shuminglei's husband working to make gloves. And prison labor is happening. It's a rampant practice happening in China, and so therefore, I like to stress that besides corporations should do their part in providing their supply chain transparency down to the raw material levels, the U.S. government should also, really, as I stated in my speech earlier, should enforce this UFLPA in rigorously and expanding the current entity list. There are only like a couple dozens of names listed on entity list. What's the difference between the companies that are listed on entity list? What does it mean when so people might think, oh, it's UFLPA, they're not going to come in from the Uyghur region anyways, why do you need it to be on the entity list? So once a company that is listed on the entity list, doesn't matter if their products are coming in from the Uyghur region, even if they're coming in from Mexico, they're coming in from Indonesia, as long as this company was listed on the list, they cannot export their goods. They cannot have their goods be shipped into the U.S. border. So it's really important that the CBP expand this list, because there are hundreds of names out there totally deserving to be on that list right now. And I know that civil society groups have already submitted such lists, and it could really help. I believe it can really help with the forced labor issues.
Yeah. Thank you, Joy. I forgot actually to share with ours. Perhaps you guys already know, but Jur is also the daughter of perhaps the most prominent prisoner of conscience of the Uyghurs. Her father, Professor Ilham Tukhti, has been serving life sentence as a peaceful Uyghur scholar. Life sentence, still there, so we need to pray for his freedom. Yeah. You have? Mingli?
Yeah, my work when I was in China before my husband arrested, my work is global e-commerce director, and I also served in the business company as a supply chain director for 1 year. So actually, Milwaukee took company and also Home Depot, Amazon, they all reply my email. They reply and they said, we do not tolerate any kinds of forced labor, and we have supply chain standards, and we have a regular audit. But that's just what they are saying on the paper. So what I want to address, there are two items. The first one is a business company, they all commit their social responsibility and they have their standards, but they just don't follow their standard. So there should be regulation and compliance force them to apply this social responsibility commit in their business. The second is the CBP. I checked. Use my only 1 year supply chain experience, and I checked all the data, trying to find pieces of data. Of course, it's hard for me for an individual, but I do find some data like import data, and there's some public data on their supplier, Milwaukee to supplier. That company was seeking an IPO in China, and it has a public document. I read all their financial report, everything, and I found that company, they have Chinese army background. So that's my question. So how the U.S. companies do their audit? How the U.S. government, the CBP, when the goods come to the States, and how you review and try to figure out. And after I reported to the CBP and Homeland Security, and after I send out the proofs to these companies and how they will take action. Actually, I think it's quite it's an issue that probably the policymakers need to consider, like how you make your policy can apply in the bottom line. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank all the panelists. I want to specifically recognize my good friend and who actually helped draft the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, Dr. Scott Flipsy, from the CECC. So Scott and off the record. Okay, don't quote. Yeah. Our Tiny CEO, Chad Bullard, is also here, and he has a long federal law enforcement experience. I think that will add our China Aid power to help advance freedom. We have like 4 minutes yet left. Maybe just one quick question. Yeah. Please share your name and affiliation.
Always dangerous to give the mic to a rabbi. I'm Rabbi Abraham Cooper. I'm the vice chair of USERF and also with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. 2 quick questions. Number one, about, I guess now 10 days or 2 weeks ago, a distinguished group of 30 Muslim leaders went to Xinjiang. I happen to know 2 of the people who went from the Gulf, very respected, religious, interfaith, and politically connected people who unfortunately gave a clean bill of health to the Chinese Communist government. I'd like to hear the reflections of everyone on the panel, including the moderator. But my second question is, this is the International Religious Forum. So, and if I missed it, I apologize. But specifically, what would you suggest to people who represent a specific church group, a synagogue, a temple, a mosque? What can your neighbors here who are directly involved and leaders within their own faith communities, what do you need them to do, and how should they do it? Thank you.
Yeah, since we have a short time, but thank you. We also need to recognize Rabbi Cooper for his contribution and work for religious freedom. And let's have each panelist have a quick...
Sure. I'll take the second question because, again, communities of faith are involved in the marketplace. You are marketplace actors. You have universities that are affiliated with religious traditions that have endowments that invest in the stock market. You have your churches and your synagogues and your mosques. All, many of these religious institutions have revolving funds or mutual funds that they invest in for their personnel, for just to maintain the you put your contributions and your funds for your religious institutions into the stock market to get returns on them. And the faith community has a long history of supporting social corporate responsibility and getting involved in pushing the market to be more humanistic in its responsibilities and pushing corporate social responsibility. This is no different from that. And so I think as market actors, people of faith should talk to your investment advisor, make sure that your investments are not complicit and not going to companies that are supporting forced labor practices, are not complicit in these. The information is out there. It's not secret. It's publicly available. There are highly credible reports coming from many people in this room, including many faith-based NGOs that do research on these issues. And the information is there. And the federal government is also doing some of this. But just making sure that your investment dollars are not going to support these companies is the most, and being vocal about it. Being active as shareholders also is really important, making your voices heard.
I'd like to reflect on the first question. So it is very common and very easy to stage a peaceful scene. If in the next 5 minutes, if somebody needs to come in and to think this room is talking about K-pop, I can make that happen. I just need 5 minutes to stage that scene. And it is very easy especially when there are Islamic scholars when they're visiting, their trips are often guided, escorted, followed, and spied, surveilled. So even the hotel that they're staying, they're appointed. They cannot just go wherever they want. Even when EU delegations requested to visit China, and UN, when they requested to visit China, when they were requesting to visit the Uyghur region, they asked to have unfettered access. They asked to have no escort. They were all rejected. So it is extremely easy to control what people can see and what people don't get to see. And oftentimes those detainees are locked up in a large camp or a large area which is located off in a suburb or on top of a mountain where people don't get to see. So it's very easy to hide what is really happening.
Especially if you don't want to see it.
Especially if you don't want to see it, exactly.
Yeah. Maybe final word from you, Minli. Because next panel is with our.
Yeah, I just want to call
Frank Wolf.
on the religious people use their influence, like in the business world, to make sure people can apply your faith and principle in their business. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think word is join hands together, especially with different faiths, and you're Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. We work together. I think that will be a force for good. I think our next panelist, Congressman Frank Wolf, will say amen to that. Let's give applause for all panelists. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you everyone for coming. We're going to transition the room into our next event, which will be a collaborative workshop on congressional advocacy with 21 Wilberforce. So I encourage you all to stick around. We don't need the audio. Oh, shoot. I'm going to see. Brent, do you know? This, I'm working on.